From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt. Our colleague Noel is on an adventure.
And will be returning soon. They call me Ben. We're joined with our guest super producer, the one and only Gnomes Griffin. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know in what may potentially be a two-parter. This is going to be a deep dive, folks, and thank you for tuning in. We previously explored cults you've never heard of. And in that conversation, you may remember we noted that many of those groups we mentioned could themselves be the subject of their own episode entire or indeed a series. So we're continuing our exploration with one of the most infamous and dangerous cults in recent Japanese history. This is the story of what is now known as Aleph, better known in the West as Aum Shinrikyo. It's a story that we cannot tell without first telling the story of its founder, who went by the name Shoko Asahara.
Oh, yes. And this story's been talked about a whole bunch since the mid-1990s when some of the major incidents that we're going to be talking about occurred. Much of the reporting that at least I've seen, Ben, came out of the BBC and British broadcasting companies, and much of that was translated from Japanese. We, however, are not Japanese speakers, so many of the names, places, and things like that, we're going to do our best to pronounce correctly.
And spell if pronunciation doesn't quite get us there with our fumbling American tongues, which does sound like the name of an album. I don't know what kind of genre it would be, Matt, but I think we're on to something. Here's the deal, folks. A lot of the context, as you just indicated, Matt, gets missed in the West. So at the beginning of this series, it is absolutely crucial to provide a little more context about Japan in general as a society, without exoticizing, without othering, without, kind of fumbling around on Google or whatever. Please be aware the following episodes may not be appropriate for all listeners. We're going to pause for a word from our sponsors. Here are the facts. All right. We've heard this often in something that I think really bugs all of us, the exoticization of Asian countries. In the past and in the present day, Japan is often called a land of contradiction. And that's true, but, the U.S. is often called a land of contradiction. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because of God and guns? Is that why?
Yeah, God and guns. Yeah. A radically divergent interpretation of Christian ideology at times, right? This happens to a lot of countries. And look, of course, every country is a special baby. Every country is unique. In the Japanese case, we could define the contradictions as things like how it's home to some of the most advanced electronics and robotics on the entire planet, but still holds this rigid, surreal dedication to older technology or older processes, especially in bureaucracy, like the fax machine or the stick. You got to sign stuff with a little stamp.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I didn't know that. Fax machines are still a big deal.
Dude, they're huge. If the podcasting doesn't work out, you and I and Gnomes, if you're in, we're going to start a fax machine company in Japan.
No, heck yeah. This whole email thing is really taking off, though. I just feel like Japan should maybe check it out. I don't know.
Oh, man. I've got some war stories to share with you off air. There's also, the fact that Japan is a world leader in a lot of aspects of environmental sustainability. Remember when we both found out, gosh, it was many years ago, we both found out about the the ability to turn trash into plasma. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Oh, I cannot remember the name. Something plasmosis. And it was incredible. You could just shoot plasma at any trash, literally any trash, and create building materials and specific gases that would be helpful in other manufacturing. And you literally turn trash into usable stuff. And for some reason, society said, not interested.
Yeah, you guys didn't send the pitch to us via fax. But despite all these innovations, Japan still has some serious environmental issues, right? The industries there can be nuts with packaging. So that's another contradiction, a contradiction that we have to mention. We're ethically required to mention this, is that while continually rated one of the overall safest countries on the current planet, this is a nation that still struggles with serious issues within the justice system, and particularly with sexual violence that cannot be left unsaid.
Oh, it's true. I noticed in documentaries about the subject we're going to be covering today, they continually talk about this concept of social cohesion that at least existed in Japan in the 1990s. I would say it continues on today. And that just means to say that many folks in society there in Japan function similarly to one another and have an outlook about the law, about rules, about what people do and how they operate on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And that's why the group we're going to be talking about today was so interesting, because it's a complete break from the norms of society, a purposeful break from those norms.
Yeah, well said, Matt. It's an interrogation of and rejection of, a reaction to the established collective homogeneity, right, of a society wherein, and you'll always hear this referenced. All my Japanese friends say this to me pretty often: the nail that stands out shall be hammered down. That's a very real thing. And there's another contradiction here when we talk about religion and spirituality, which is something human beings still haven't quite gotten their heads around. Japan is often going to be portrayed as a secular, atheistic land. But calling it that depends on how you define religion. And the religion definition is a little different in the West, right? You know, you will know followers of any number of religions here in the United States. In Japan, there's more of a, without sounding dismissive, there's almost more of a Chipotle approach, right? So think, well, you know, like a buffet, like you mix and match the stuff you like from belief systems, right?
Okay.
Get a little avocado of Islam, get a little, you know, get a side of lettuce from Shinto, put it together in your own spiritual burrito. Whereas how weird would it be? I'm sure we'll get some emails about this. I hope we do. How weird would it be for you to run into someone in the Bible Belt and they tell you that they're sort of a Buddhist Baptist, right?
That's cool.
I think that's a very interesting person.
Oh yeah, me too. I'm into it. Let's do more mix and matches on spirituality. It reminds me of the Unitarian Universalist church that my grandparents were a part of, where you would go in one week, like going to church, but oh wait, we're learning about Hinduism today. Oh, okay, cool. Oh wait, we're reading from the Torah today. Oh wait, next week. Wait, what? What is going on?
I love the Unitarians, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, the concept of a personal philosophy on spirituality is pretty compelling to me as a human. So I like it.
Yeah, I think most people would. I think everybody kind of has to address that on a personal level. I think that's a universal experience, a universal personal experience, universal personal, another album name.
But what I really want is just one guy with a beard that's going to tell me everything that I need to know and what to do and how to live and where to live and who to talk to.
Oh, I have some literature for you after this.
Okay.
It's not me though. It's another guy. So like, all right, Japan does have talked about Aum Shinrikyo in the past. We've talked at length about different cults and cultic activities and the tactics, like how a cult is essentially best defined as a utility belt of tactics, similar to fascism. Japan has a lot of organizations that locals and outsiders would describe as cults. And again, we're not dunking on this country because the United States has a lot of organizations that are in no way religious that could be defined as cults. In Japan, it often draws from the indigenous religious makeup, like Shinto, right? Which was, it still remains. Like when I go to Japan, I end up visiting holy sites of the Shinto religion and also holy sites of the Buddhist religion. Buddhism arrived in Japan around the 6th century CE, and the interaction, again, the sort of Venn diagramming on a personal and social level of these two religions greatly influence Japanese society. So you'll find people who say they're not particularly religious, but they do go to insert holy site here on insert significant day here.
Well, yeah, even if you have never fully paid attention to the specifics about Japanese culture, you would likely have at least encountered some of the imagery, the architecture, the vision of Shinto and the veneration of ancestors, and some of the places like you're talking about, the holy sites. They end up proliferating throughout, especially pop culture, as almost a touchstone of something either very, I don't know, I was going to say very cool, but I think maybe that's my interpretation of it from when I was a kid. Like, man, that's cool. Whatever that is, that's cool. Which, comes to like the obsession of comic books and some of the other things where you actually see that imagery.
Yes.
I do think it's interesting how that is a representation of religion, and you maybe don't understand that when you're viewing it as an outsider, just looking in.
Right. Especially with, from the American perspective, or from the U.S. perspective, I should say, the prioritization of a separation between church and state. Not quite the same thing in this culture. I'd like to share an anecdote with one of my old professors that I, as you know, I visit every few years or so. One time, this guy said, "Look, here's the deal. You'll be eating at like a corporate food court, right? And, you've got the big brand names, the fast food, the noodle shop, all that stuff. And you look around, and in a not especially prominent or prestigious place, boom, there's a shrine. There's a holy site.
Right next to the Sbarro?
Right next to the Sbarro, 2 meters from the McDonald's. And you might say, this commodification is depressing. What happened to humans? But then again, in the exact same situation, you'll be eating at the same food court, and boom, you see that shrine, and you realize the existence of spirituality amid this hubbub is inspiring. The past stays with us, even in a country that evolves at such a breakneck pace. And that's why what we would call diplomatically New Age spiritual movements are up until the 1990s were very highly tolerated in Japan, and a lot relied upon interpretations of Shinto and Buddhist and Hindu belief systems, incorporating Christianity, aspects of Islam and Judaism as well. All the hits, all the big ones, just sort of melded together in people's personal explorations and the teachings of those people to their followers. So, look, we've seen it time and time again. You can easily correlate a rise in new spiritual movements or even cultic organizations to times of social unrest. Cults exploded in the United States during the Great Depression, right? Cults exploded in the social unrest of the advent of the internet, and no country is an exception to this rule.
Yeah, and stuff went really bad as the turn of the new century was on its way in the new millennium. That's when stuff seems to really have gone wrong with new age spiritual movements.
Yes, yeah, I agree with you. We know that in the past, due to a number of variables, particularly the end of widespread emperor worship, that's like the final boss of ancestor worship in parts of Japan, leading through World War II. After World War II, there's a lot of Western influence. The practice of Shinto is not banned, but it is abolished as the state-sponsored religion. You don't have to do it anymore. And because of that and the massive horrors of World War II and the unrest, we see a boom of spiritual movements. Without this sort of, to your point about homogeneity, without this state-sponsored Shinto prioritization, millions of people in the country experience a spiritual vacuum. And so naturally, they seek to fill that vacuum with something else. The West is pushing heavy on the Japanese government for all kinds of things. One of those things is lifting censorship rules on these new spiritual movements, and then also allowing for these religious movements to have those tasty tax exemptions, which I'm going to say, Matt, I still think it's kind of, beat me or gnomes, I still think it's kind of bullshit.
What? That's what it's all about, baby. The pursuit of tax-free stuff. Like that's the dream. That's the post-World War II dream for every nation. Like, seriously. Yeah. Well, and we've talked about this a little bit before. The post-World War II world for each individual country and what that meant, rebuilding whatever it is, the identity of individual countries, that because there was a lot of rebuilding that had to be done, especially in Japan after, if you imagine the reputation hit that a country takes after it's involved in something like that. Sure. Even the United States went through its own cultural shift there in the 1940s and 50s. And this concept of what the dream of being a citizen of a particular country is, like, what does it mean to be a citizen of this country? What should I be? How should I live? Right? What should my work look like and my family look like? And what goals should I be striving towards? All that stuff starts changing post World War II. Yeah.
Who are we? Who am I in this milieu? And for a lot of people, the answer is cults. Again, not to other any country. This is as common as what's the most common Magic the Gathering card? Probably like a land card.
Yeah, that's probably a goblin or something. I don't know, an island. An island. Hey, there we go.
Yeah, nice. We'll go with island. It's as common as an island.
Yeah. Well, but I guess what I was getting at there, Ben, is that so many people viewed themselves as kind of or attempting to fit the picture of the thing that society is kind of reflecting back at them, right? And that I think about baby boomers. I think about my grandparents and my, then up to my parents, and I think about how people were trying to fit the mold of the thing, do the right things, right, for themselves and for their family. And I would say these alternate religious movements it's just a way to not get stuck in that same thing that especially young people are observing their parents, like maybe getting caught in the trap of some of that stuff.
Right. Reacting to the expectations, right? There's a wave, right? Am I just a meaningless part of the wave? Am I a drop of water my own, right? And that's why, this is very familiar to folks in the United States who are notoriously individualistic. Right. You could pick a, what's that old joke? It's a mean joke, but you can go up to so many people in the United States and tell them the definition of narcissism and their first question and the dangers of narcissism. And their first question will be, yeah, but how do we make that about me though? Right. And that's a danger. That's like a systemic flaw in this society, but it has advantages. Anyway, fast forward. It's the 1970s, 1980s. World War II, the legacies and the horrors remain, obviously, but Japan is on a massive upswing and society is moving en masse toward the grand game of capitalism, materialistic pursuit. You better get in the right university. You better get the right job because that will set you for life. Also, here's when you're supposed to marry. Here is when you are supposed to have kids. And woe betide any nail that stands out.
Yeah, and you better work your ass off. Like for the entirety of the time that you're in school to the entirety of the time that you get into this corporate rat race, you work until you can work no more. And if what we talked about in a previous episode, if your boss is going out for drinks, you're going out for drinks and you're staying up until he's done or whatever, that whole thing that we talked about.
And you better be back at work at 7.
Yeah.
Because you're at 7 a.m. because you're supposed to be there. And, in these, since I have to go to this country on a semi-regular basis, I can confirm some of it's loosening up, but it's still very much exactly as you're describing. And a lot of people have almost a kind of PTSD from this, because if you make a mistake, it can be very difficult to repair that mistake, to repair your reputation, as Robert W. Chambers would say. This is why there are so many people who feel left behind in the 70s and the 80s. They're disillusioned. You're seeking, as all humans do, a deeper meaning to the world in which you live, the big questions, like the ones we asked Dan Bush earlier. I mean, you can graduate from the top university. You can manage to move to Tokyo and make a living. You marry right, you get a good job, satisfy your ancestors, have an heir. But then you look around one day and you say, why am I old now? Why did I do all this stuff? What does it mean? That's why people look for alternate explanations. That's why people in this nation, in particular in Japan, start at this point in time joining various new religious movements at an unprecedented pace. Recent estimates tell us there are no less than 183,000 officially registered religions in Japan.
Whoa. Oh, those delicious tax breaks. Oh, Ben, I was just looking back to remember some of the major Japanese corporations that are having a heyday at this time. Corporations that have been around for a long time. If you think about, I think it was Toyota. So Toyota, which has been around since like the 30s, right? Post-war times, they start exporting cars to the U.S. This is like boom time for Toyota. It's becoming one of the big names in car manufacturing and purchasing, well, especially in the United States and in Western markets. Then you've also got things coming around in the 80s there, like Nintendo coming around, Sony, really giving birth to all kinds of new technology, like you talked about at the beginning of the show there. Hitachi was a major player. It's just interesting just imagining, I mean, there's so many more, by the way, but you just imagine some of these huge corporate entities that are also helping to get the corporate profits are crazy high, right? And then you're imagining all these other organizations that are doing the tax thing that you're describing here.
Right.
And I just see this picture of people trying to escape those big corporate settings to get to a place that's a little more internal, maybe a little more, again, I use the word spiritual for that kind of stuff, but just less stuffy, I would almost say.
Yeah, the Zaibatsu, they're called the big companies that are beyond the legislation of monopoly, right? Vertically integrated, financially integrated, and touching every industry. If I can build you a car, let me build you a dishwasher. And hey, do you want some shoelaces? That kind of stuff.
Well, yeah,
that's very real.
And think about even just the dress associated with a corporate environment like that. The suits, the dresses, the way you appear as you walk around and then you look in the mirror, people trying to get the heck away from that. And if you've got an idea, got some ideas rolling around, what if we packaged this as a religion? You could get people probably to jump ship out of that corporate structure pretty easily.
100%. Yeah. And well said. On the dystopian side of that coin, that yen would be, before we go to a break, I don't know why this just occurred to me, but what's stopping these very big companies from making their own religions? That'd be like, would you join the church, the Zaibatsu church? If they were like, Mitsubishi is also a religion.
Look, I'm going to draw a parallel here that's not real, but I feel it sometimes.
All right.
If you think about the devotees of Sony or Microsoft, depending on the gaming system that you like grew up with or that you currently play, and it's almost brand loyalty, but it goes deeper than that, I think.
Yeah.
The Nintendo people. I mean, I don't know.
It's prevalent in electronics and in automotives, is it not?
Yeah.
Like the
I'm a Toyota boy.
See, right? Yeah, and I actually did have an interesting conversation with a girl I was dating, whose father described them as very much a Nissan family.
Interesting.
Yeah, he was super cool with me until we walked out of his house and he saw my Ford.
That is really interesting, and that is that's a thing. I know several friends, like families of friends, that are Honda folks, and they will just always drive a Honda. It doesn't matter what it is; it's a Honda if it's in my garage. Yeah.
I think we're touching on something that could be a really cool sci-fi story in the future, while it's still science fiction. We also want to tell you before we go to a quick break that of those almost 200,000 officially registered religions in Japan, only, like, they're not all created equally in terms of size. Only about 2,000 are pretty big in their own right. But if you math out the math, right, and play with the demographics a little, what this teaches us is that something like 10 to 20% of Japanese nationals are in some way connected to what we would loosely describe as new religions. We'll pause here for a word from our sponsors. And we've returned. So, again, before we dunk too hard on organizations that can be called cults, we're being very careful with our language here. It's important to know that the vast majority of these organizations are just what they say on the tin. They're harmless. They're hopefully helpful to people on a spiritual level. They're ways of encountering, processing, understanding reality. There are countless gurus, everywhere. You can't throw a stone without hitting a guru's compound these days, or ikigai, if you like, in Japan. They come and go, right? And maybe their ideas seem esoteric or eccentric to some people, but for their followers, this is very important. So Japan, like any modern society should, they tolerate these groups. Go do your thing, right? If you think the giraffe is the final form of evolution, tally ho for you. Just don't hurt anybody.
Well, yeah. Well, because you find groups coming out of Japan like Happy Science. Remember when we talked about them?
Yes, I love the name.
It's such a beautiful, it's a beautiful concept of an organization. You got some Venus stuff, throw that in there, it's really fun. It was fun. I remember when we covered that. It was literally a happy time to talk about that organization.
All three of us are grinning.
Yeah, well, many describe it as a cult. Was his name? Ryohu Okawa, I think, was the leader's name. And, you look at the guy and he's always smiling and it's called Happy. My gosh, I'm in.
Yeah. Ryoho Okawa. Yeah. Institute for Research in Human Happiness. Sign me up.
Come on.
You know what I mean? It sounds scientific. It sounds like there's work to be done. There are probably pizza parties. This is a cool job. So we are taking time and making space to establish that the vast majority of these things and these leaders and these self-taught spiritual experts are not bad people, right? They are people with conviction, but spiritual conviction, not legal conviction. And that'll be important later. Right. From this milieu arrives on stage a fascinating, a dangerous, frankly terrible guy, who sees himself as a prophet and eventually goes by the name Shoko Asahara, but that's not his original name.
No. I think you would pronounce his name Chizuo. Maybe I'm wrong. Is it ch? Is that a ch sound with a ch? Chizuo Matsumoto. He was born on March 2nd, 1955. And one of the main things you'll hear about him when he's reported on in a documentary or stated about him is that he was partially blind or mostly blind.
Yeah.
He had to go to a special boarding school because of that condition. And he was there until the age of 6. And then he ended up graduating. Well, I guess this is graduating from high school or the upper level schools in 1973. Yeah. And at that time, he came out of a place called the Kumamoto Prefecture. And I don't know where that is in Japan, to be honest, Ben.
No worries. That's one of the places I have not been to. It's in a central area of Japan, or it's a prefecture in Kyushu. And Kyushu, I should say, if you picture Japan as kind of an elbow of an archipelago, right? And Hokkaido, the most northern part, is up where your hand is if you raise your arm. And, the elbow is kind of central Japan. Then Kyushu Island is sort of like armpitish.
Okay. Wow.
Not an insult. That's just to establish the geospatial relationship.
Got it. Okay. The reason I'm wondering about that is just I wonder what kind of the societal pressures. I wonder what it was like to live in that area, right? To grow up as a kid,
right?
Because I just don't know. I don't know. We don't know all of his personal life stuff. Nobody's got a full bio of this guy from a child going on, right? What are the major events in his life and some of these things that occurred? We know he was faced with challenges, right, as he's growing up, and probably learned a lot of lessons as he's going through these schools. And then finally he graduates and he applies for medical school at Kumamoto University. And like this is formative time, right, for somebody who is moving on from a child to becoming an adult, and they're going to further their studies. What happens to him then?
Yeah, we have to underline that point you made, Matt, because most of the information you will find about Chizuo Matsumoto's childhood comes from him and comes from Aum followers. So it's very much an unreliable narrator situation, but there's no escaping it. Like you said, especially in this society at the time, he is overcoming tremendous challenges. He does not pass the entrance exams in Kumamoto University. He later moves to a prep school in the big city where almost everybody wants to live, Tokyo. And he applies to Tokyo University. Again, looking to go pre-med, prestigious, very prestigious school, highly ambitious. It's a huge win if you get in there. He did not. He doesn't get into either school, but he's not going to let this keep him down. He maintains a deep interest in medicine, especially what we'll call traditional medicine, acupuncture, Chinese herbal remedies, pharmacology. He is an autodidact. He is self-taught. And he eventually opens up his own traditional Chinese medicine spot, a pharmacy in Funabashi, Chiba, which is sort of like northeast of Tokyo.
Yep. So we've got a picture here already of a young, ambitious man who is probably pretty intelligent, but just can't pass these entrance exams, already feeling a lot of resentment against the establishment, side that he wanted to gain access to, but they wouldn't let him in.
Yeah. And like you articulated earlier, he is increasingly feeling like one of those people left behind by this breakneck system. But at this point in his life, we could consider him a fairly successful guy. He's overcome those tremendous challenges. He's got his own business. He seems set for a happy, long career. He's not locked into the slavery of being a salaryman. He's essentially a faith healer, but also he's got some romance going on. He marries a fellow student from that prep school he visits in Tokyo, and things start to go sideways in 1982. He is arrested by the authorities They say, you're selling fake remedies, bud. Ultimately, he's convicted for, the term they use is selling medicine without a license. The less diplomatic term is straight up fraud. And he gets in massive trouble. He gets fined. The fine really wallops him. His business goes bankrupt.
Yep. This is a great time to talk about this practice of faith healing, laying on hands, all of these things we've talked about in the past. We have full episodes. You can go check them out right now.
Oh, yeah. I really dig those, man. Actually, there was a weird moment in those where, I know we're onto something when we counterintuitively start to support something that both of us thought was just hogwash before. There was some point in the faith healing episode, maybe it was about placebo effects.
Yes.
Where I remember thinking, I don't know, man, if it works, it works.
Yeah. Your mind can do incredible things with your body when it comes to like rejuvenating yourself based sometimes on your belief that you are being rejuvenated, which is intense. And, we also talked about the connection between certain parts of your brain and the chemicals and the hormones and stuff that they release and how that can actually affect your body in positive ways. So some of this stuff isn't completely bunk. And when we talk about the individual human beings that are attempting to sell those services and those goods, it's really tough to get into the mind of an individual and say, oh, does this person just like know that they're selling water that's not actually holy?
Hey, it's activated water.
Well, yeah.
But
or do they fully truly believe that this water has healing properties? And if they do, then it's a whole different thing to me at least.
Right.
When I imagine the reasons people are doing things, right? But there is the con man aspect that flows through all of it. And that is the fact that you're doing something that's getting over on somebody else simply for monetary gain.
Right. What are your intentions? Monetary gain or influence over people, right? That's when it gets real gnarly. And I think that is so well put, man. And it's important to remember that people can be perhaps scientifically mistaken without being jerks or without being pills. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They really are trying to help. And so I think it's something that irritates you and me and hopefully all of us listening at home when folks who consider themselves skeptics are incredibly militaristic and overzealously dismissive of people who are trying their best. You know what I mean? Even if you don't agree, if they're not harming folks, just like the government of Japan said, then do as thou wilt.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost want, we're about to talk about the organization, right? About the religion part that this individual gets into. And I think this is a good place to say it. Even in interviews that were conducted in the late 20-teens, in the early 2020s of individual followers who at one point were a part of this organization, they still maintain their time in this organization was one of, if not the best portions of their life from a spiritual perspective, from a growth perspective. So before we even get into any of it, there's positivity to be found in most things that we would look at and go, oh.
Yeah. We would go, why is your diet like that? And they would say, oh, no, it works for me. I dig it. And a lot of these folks that you could be tricky to call them survivors of this movement, but a lot of them continue those practices today under a different name and are, by the way, I think we should say this now too, we'll reiterate at the end of the series, they are not criminals.
Oh yeah.
In any way, right? Just it's kind of like the argument with Christianity, right? You meet someone who is a Christian, that doesn't mean they're part of the Inquisition that the Spaniards did.
True.
You can't really put that on them. But
we're going to talk about the legal overwatch, let's say, of some of these groups in the modern day. Can you? This is a little tease, but. Can you imagine if everybody who is a part of one of the world's major religions or all of the major religions because of past atrocities had the same kind of like checkups and surveillance.
At that level? Oh, buddy. Yeah, man, that's crazy. And okay, so let's set the stage for the Providence, the origin story of a man who has not yet come to call himself Shoko Asahara. He joins around the time he's having these legal troubles. A little bit before, he is a member of a new spiritual movement called Agonshu. And this combines elements of Hinduism and Buddhism. Again, pretty common, not particularly unusual for a movement of its sort in Japanese culture at this time. People are all in search for those deeper truths. Unless you're really out there, folks you know in your neighborhood, your coworkers, casual friends, if it ever comes up, they're going to kind of talk to you about it in a positive way, like a hobby, even if they're not into it. It's kind of like if you met somebody who was super duper into, what's an unproblematic hobby?
Magic the Gathering.
Okay,
Sorry.
super duper into Magic the Gathering or collectible card games. And then you think, okay, yeah, that's just my pal. That's what they do on the weekends. And sometimes they take off work because there's a Magic tournament.
Yeah. Just because the planeswalkers are really important to them doesn't mean they're a weirdo.
Yeah, we're just going to move the meeting because the Final Fantasy iteration came out. You know? We didn't move the meeting, but those cards do look sick. So this is the issue for this guy who, again, is still going by the name Matsumoto. He doesn't find the current combinations of belief in Agonshu to be interesting, right? Or to really get the job done. And they can't carry him through the pain, the trauma, the social embarrassment, legal woes. So
it doesn't push him to that place where he finds the next set of actions he needs to take, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's what in a lot of ways, like we rely on society or a loved one, a teacher, a mentor of sorts to get us where we're going. And sometimes that can just be a set of beliefs that kind of lets you know, oh, okay, in the order of operations of what I need to be doing in life, this thing lets me know that's my next step. But he didn't find that there, right? But what does he decide to do?
Oh, yeah. He didn't find the metaphysical signposts, the guided guardians. So he says, I'll be the change. I'm going to do it myself. There's a better way to figure this out, and I am the man for the job. I'm establishing my own spiritual movement, my Aum spiritual movement. I am going to call it Aum Shinrikyo, which will later become known to critics and devotees alike as Aum Shinrikyo, or in English, something like Aum Supreme Truth.
Whoa. And with that, let's take a quick break. Hear a word from our sponsors. We'll be back soon.
Here's where it gets crazy. He doesn't just figure this out, right, in his apartment and stay in his apartment. He doesn't get a job at the Combini or anything. He hits the street. He's out there, putting his, what we used to say? Okay, well, he's out on the streets, and I can't remember the cool English phrase for it, but he's handing out pamphlets. He's proselytizing on street corners. He's like, you know what you need to do? Learn yoga with me. Also, here's some ginseng.
Yeah. Well, did you see that picture of him that got circulated early on, where it's allegedly him meditating and then floating off of the ground in his, the cross-legged stance that you see in meditation? There's this one where he's got a real grimace on his face and he's floating, it looks like, which, to my mind, it's like he did a really hard jump move and then got into the position and good photo was taken.
Yeah, that also feels like you're entering the land of con artistry at some point. You know what I mean? This works, though. Whatever he's doing, whatever spectacles he's creating and his evangelical approaches, it works. He starts to get more and more followers who say, hey, I'm disillusioned too by the frantic materialism. I actually don't want to work all the time. I kind of miss seeing my spouse. Which will be funny later, in an evil way. And so they join up, they start following this guy. Now, at first, they're not starting a commune immediately. They're buying his literature. They're listening to him. They're telling other people about him. By 1984, this guy has a large enough following and therefore funding to support the creation of the Aum Spiritual Academy. And it's right in downtown Tokyo, which sounds impressive until you realize that Tokyo is so freaking big that it has multiple downtowns.
Oh,
so it's
wow.
one of the downtown Tokyos.
I've never been there, so I don't know what that looks like and feels like. How, just for anybody who hasn't been to Tokyo, how would you compare it to being somewhere near the center of Manhattan?
Yeah, maybe one way to describe Tokyo would be to say, imagine several New York cities all just scrunched together, and each being unique, having their own sort of reputation, and similar to New York, an exception here in the West. Tokyo has amazing public transit, so you really can get anywhere. It can be confusing, but yeah. New York City is checkers, Tokyo is chess.
Wow. Okay.
Or in terms of like complexity, I guess. That's not the perfect analogy, but here's the best way to put it. Imagine if 1/4 of the U.S. population all lived in the New York metro area. 1/4 of the population, roughly, of Japan lives in the Tokyo metro area.
Wow.
Yeah. So shout out to anybody whose anxiety just kicked up a notch.
Yeah, seriously. Here in Atlanta, I'm imagining, someone saying downtown, but then referring to like Buckhead or something, but also maybe referring to Little Five Points or as a downtown, or, specific areas that are bustling, but aren't necessarily the same thing as the major downtown area.
Right. Like the epicenter, etc.
My mom, this is so funny that you're talking about different downtowns and like what that could mean. And my mom the other day lives like 5 minutes away from me. I'm in like South DeKalb, East Atlanta Village. She lives over in Elmwood Park, which is like very obviously, if you're in Atlanta, you probably know the neighborhoods. And if you're not, that's so specific. But she literally was like, yeah, I was walking over to downtown Glenwood Park the other day. And I said, that's not a thing. What are you talking about? She goes, but did you know what I was talking about? Like where all the shops and the Jenny's ice cream is over there. And I said, so like, yes, but I'm a little mad that you called it downtown Glenwood Park. That's not a thing. She goes, yeah, there's also a downtown East Atlanta Village. And I'm like, I think that people just call that East Atlanta Village. And like the general area is East Atlanta. But she's like, every neighborhood can have a downtown. And I'm like, Ormwood Park, where you live, does not have a downtown, girl. Grant Park, I would not say has a downtown. But anyway, it's not a downtown.
It's the zebra downtown, I guess, or the draft, since we mentioned. That's a great point. Yeah.
Anyway, that was like, I was like, that's so funny that that's coming up. Anyway, so I just wanted to share that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nums. We'd love to hear your downtowns as well, folks. And Nums, you've inspired us here. How far can we take this? Maybe I can pick a room in my house and start calling it the downtown.
Yeah, I'm going to the downtown. The downtown kitchen, the downtown bathroom.
It's just my basement.
Yeah. Well, your basement's pretty sick, man. Honestly, that's
going downtown.
Yeah.
From what did they used to say on that video game? From downtown.
That's it.
That's NBA
Jam.
NBA Jam. He's on fire. Yes. So maybe downtown is a matter of your own perspective, as Noam's mom so beautifully pointed out there. And thank you for that. So the idea, without getting too far aside into Japanese geography here, or urban centers, typically people who live in that area are maybe not going to say downtown. They're going to say the specific area they're talking about, like the notorious Shinjuku or something. Shinjuku is where you see a lot of tourists who enjoy partying.
Oh, I don't know what that means.
Often in a legal way, but not always.
Okay.
That's like, that's where you'll see a lot of Westerners drinking, sketchy bars. There's a big sex trade. There's some organized crime kind of things, but still very much safer than a lot of places in the United States.
Like Ponce de Leon.
Yes, it is safer than the neighborhood of our old office by a country mile, by a long, long way. I didn't tell you, the Yams guy is back. A few days ago, I guess he must have just gotten released, but there was a guy who, speaking of specific references, Matt and Gnomes, there was a guy who disappeared a few years back in the neighborhood, and he was locally famous to my neighbors and myself because for some reason, in the wee hours of the night, you would just hear him yelling about yams. He would just be running around, and it was always the same guy. And he was just going, yams! Whoa. Sometimes as a question, sometimes as a statement.
But he's back, baby!
He's back, baby! Yam time! He's on fire. He's on yam. Anyway, we've diverged. Tokyo has, of course, like any other large population, it has its share of esoterics, eccentrics, characters. This guy who's not yet calling himself Asahara, he becomes one of these. And his system is, I don't want to say plagiarized because I don't think that's fair, but it is an amalgamation of pre-existing belief systems, including some of the new spiritual movement stuff that he encountered in the past, notably Hinduism and Buddhism.
Yeah, it goes heavy on the karma here about you don't want karma to build up, and there's specific things you need to do to make sure you don't have karma. And if you get too much of the karma, you can come back and you will be reborn. But there are consequences for, certain ways of living, certain actions you take, and all that stuff. So there is it's got built into it a system of punishment and a way of life.
Mm. And as you said, that all important guideline, right? The metaphysical milestones, the instructions for a well-lived life that you should treat as an investment in your spiritual future. And look, just like a lot of other movements of its type, Aum is a work in progress. And similar to the belief systems of David Koresh or Charles Manson, it evolves over time and it takes a more pessimistic path as time continues. So later the leader will begin to incorporate aspects of apocalyptic prophecies from Christianity, for just one example. And he's pulling from a lot of stuff as well as ancient Indian spiritual traditions. But at this point, it's 1980s, right? He knows he's on to something.
It's positivity. It's the supreme truth stuff,
Yeah. Let me help you help yourself. You know what I mean? I'm going to teach you how to fish. And so he expands the brand name. It's 1987. This is where he starts calling it not Aum Spiritual Academy, not the original name, but Aum Shinrikyo. And he legally, at this point, changes his own name, his personal name, to Shoko Asahara. And he is so strategic. He's very smart. He is strategic in targeting followers. He's not going to turn away, some outcast, someone of low social importance who didn't go to the right school or what have you. But similar to Scientology, he and the Aum members are targeting and prioritizing highly educated followers. They want computer programmers. They want the whiz kids, the scientists. They love people who are in the police, the military, or high levels of government. Expertise, social pull, positions of authority and influence. Matt, would you agree that's kind of how Scientology is operated?
What? They would. I don't know what you're talking about, Ben.
Right. Plausible deniability.
We talked about that, pretty extensively with former leaders of Scientology about their practices there. But I would just say there is a strategic aim at those folks, those specialists, those people who have influence, but also aiming at young people who are either headed in that trajectory to become, members of the society, but then almost plucking them out, or at least making the organization be extremely attractive to those younger people in institutions, especially, to get them to come over and begin to believe in kind of his stuff, and specifically in him as a leader and as a spiritual symbol almost, so that once those younger folks get to where they're going in their careers, sometimes leaving their careers to just join up and bring in what they've learned thus far, other times staying where they are in that world and still being a follower.
Right. Again, totally legal in all of these professions, right? You can perhaps join the national diet, hypothetically, right? The legislative body, and you can still be a member of Aum. This is not a bad thing. It would actually be kind of weird and undemocratic to persecute you for your harmless spiritual beliefs. But you nailed it there, Matt, because it's very much what Asahara is offering at this point is a message similar to Timothy Leary back in the mid-1960s. Turn on, tune in, drop out, right? Follow me to a greater truth. And people are digging it. By 1989, Aum is in its halcyon days. It has grown to the point where the Japanese government officially co-signs it. They recognize the movement as a religious organization. This is a huge win, and still not particularly unique. It's just now considered legitimate, as are thousands of other similar movements. And Aum's system is evolving. Asahara's understanding of his role is likewise evolving. He always was kind of a teacher and a mentor, right? And he was helping people help themselves. But by the time Aum gains official recognition, he started getting his followers to call him some nicknames, in addition to his newly claimed or his legally changed name. He likes it when they call him things like Savior of the Country, the Holy Pope, or a personal favorite of ours, Tokyo's Christ.
Oh, yes. Tokyo's Christ. I think this is a good time to insert just the fact that this gentleman took a little trip pretty far away from where he lives, a journey to go and see the Dalai Lama, and made a big deal about taking pictures with himself because he got a meeting with, I think it was the 14th Dalai Lama, and having those images, the pictures of himself as a spiritual leader with the Dalai Lama, who is often an accepted spiritual leader, especially for if you got a group that's basing itself on Buddhism and Hinduism and some of these other beliefs, it's a really great picture to have, because it's almost as though this major accepted spiritual leader is accepting him by just being in his presence and meeting with him. And I'm just imagining him incorporating that in some way that we don't even really fully understand, but with his followers.
100%. Yeah, you're right. For another similar comparison, think of it like if you're an up and coming musician or an MC. One of the biggest things you could do for your own credibility is to have material that associates you with an established source or another established force in your pursuit, right? So he's, by associating himself with the Dalai Lama, he's also kind of through cognitive osmosis appearing to be like the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
That being said, don't take any pictures with Ye. Just pass up pictures with Kanye West. I'm glad we skipped on that one.
But if Killer Mike is in a good mood, definitely get one with him.
Yeah. No. If Mike's in town, yeah. Just if Mike's downtown, check in. So this is important because all of this, his followers are super on board with this. They're very rarely disillusioned at this point. More and more people are joining, and as they join, we see the emergence of an inner hierarchy. There are senior members. There is an inner circle. There are, therefore, more and more strict rules for the rank and file. You're eschewing most of your material possessions because they're preventing you from attaining your spiritual goals. You cut ties with your friends and your family. Not violently. You just ghost them, or you give them a letter and you say, hey, we're on different paths, good hustle. Thanks, Mom and Dad. And
there's a documentary from Endeavor that talks with a specific follower that describes that exact thing that, again, we've described with almost every breakaway spiritual group that we've ever covered on this show, that gradual, eventual split from everybody. And you have to do it in order to live the way that your leaders want you to live.
And there's nothing wrong with having a chosen family, of course. And there are people who have to go no contact with their family members and their loved ones for any number of reasons. To be clear, that is not what is happening here. These families are not necessarily evil people, nor abusive, neglectful, or any of that. They are just a contradicting source of information for Asahara and for Aum. And so he sets up a new center on the slopes of Mount Fuji in 1990, and his followers are practicing, living life under his direction. Strict rules. Matt, we described a couple of them. These are all the hits. If you're starting a cult, what you can or cannot read, what you can or cannot eat, who you can or cannot speak with, and what to believe, right? And it's all in the pursuit of saving your soul.
And the souls of everyone else who's there with you. We're all saving each other together.
You must proselytize. This is not a pyramid scheme, right? There just happens to be one guy at the top, but think of it as a reverse funnel, as they say on Always Sunny in Philadelphia, right? Asahara you remember that one?
Yeah.
What was that? Revigoron?
Yeah, I can't remember. I just remember the image of think of it as a reverse funnel.
Yeah, right. Asahara is a global phenomenon now. This will be familiar to some of us in the crowd, but some of us who are a little bit younger may not have clocked this. This guy is touring. He's in lectures. He knows the Dalai Lama, say his supporters. He also, I know this is immensely fascinating to both of us, he also creates this amazingly effective publishing and propaganda initiative. Think of Jack Chick Tracks, spelled Jack, C-H-I-C-K, tracks here in the West. If you haven't read them, you're in for a treat. Think of that times 10. Sort of like how Tokyo is New York times an order of magnitude, right? Matt, can we talk about the books, the literature? I love the cartoons, honestly.
Yeah, the cartoons are amazing. So one of the things we do know about this leader is that as a kid, he loved comic books and comic style, like graphic novel writing, manga and all that stuff. The concept of it, he loved it. He was a big fan. And what he did, he and his followers, they turned him into a superhero of sorts, like a religious superhero in some of these cartoons and stuff, wearing, the ones that I've seen, at least in clips, are him wearing it's almost a purpley robe, like outfit.
Yeah.
And he's very soft in his movements and very smooth and just very contemplative and quiet in his demeanor, but happy. And he shines on screen with these things as somebody you would be interested in. As a character, you might go, oh, what's that character's name? Or what's that superhero's?
What are his powers? Yeah. What are his attributes, right? What is the message here? People are captivated, and it's doing something very clever format wise. It is meeting people where they're at, right? That is a key for all initiatives of this sort, good or bad, right? Ethical or unethical, evil or noble. He is getting so much attention from this. And I love the point about how the followers are instructed to transmit these messages. So it was not uncommon for family members to be trying to contact their loved ones and then receive some literature in reply. Like, I saw this, I thought of you. Let's talk again. I can't wait to hear what you think about this.
Yeah. Because it's controlling I was going to say just thought control. What is the phrasing you use for that, Ben? Shaping the context in which you can have conversations, like
the Overton window.
That's what it is. Like, that's what it becomes, to where if you're going to even contact your family, it's going to be about this thing.
Mm-hmm. And I hope it's okay to say this on air. I think it's an important note. Our guest producer, Gnomes, just pointed out a second ago that Koresh, who we mentioned previously, is a little bit different from Asahara in a way that I think means Asahara operationally fumbled. I know that sounds evil. I'm not saying either of these are good guys. I'm just saying operationally, Gnomes, we think you made a good point about how Asahara kind of fumbled the bag. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, Koresh was very open. So David Koresh, obviously not a good guy. I would never say that David Koresh is a good guy. He was, in fact, a pedophile. However, he really, like, the whole thing was like, I don't want to separate you from your family. I want your family to come and join us. And you're going to come and live on this compound with us. And we're all going to be a family. So he's like inviting people to bring their families. He's getting people to bring their families from the UK and Australia, like all across the ocean, to come live in Waco, Texas on a weird compound. The caveat is that he will marry your daughter and also maybe your wife, and he'll probably have a child with both of them. And you know what? That's a big caveat.
Was that in the pitch, Gnomes? Do you think that was in the pitch to the husbands?
And so, like, I have to imagine that the pitch was, listen, this is how it has to happen. I am, however, the new prophet. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't you want me to impregnate your wife? That's going to make her even more special. Is I feel like how that was pitched, you know?
Yeah, or do the sunk cost fallacy and wait till they get there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like, surprise.
Yeah. By the way, first off, welcome. How was the flight? Also, this happened. This reminds me of something we discussed with the Brides of Christ cult back in Oregon, way back in the day, wherein their cult leader, a German dude who was pulling people from his former colleagues in the Salvation Army, he convinced these families temporarily to allow that kind of sexual and reproductive control, with the idea being that he had, as a holy figure, had to sleep with as many female cult members as possible, because eventually one of those children from those interactions would be the return of Christ. And then later he said, oh, wait, fake out, psych, I'm Jesus. Which happens often.
Similar
right?
with Courage a little bit. I don't know.
There's just like a lot of Jesuses floating around. It's really hard to tell which one's the real one, you know? Easy to get confused.
So think critically. And the last note on this one, it reminds me of that old anecdote. I know we mentioned on the show before, but about those three guys who all claimed that they were Jesus Christ in an asylum. And they got some doctor who must have just been having a weird day, put them all in a room together and said, you can't come out until you guys solve this. So they're in like a real Jesus escape room. And according to the story, they eventually say, okay, it's all copacetic. We agreed. So let us out. And then the doctor lets them out and interviews them one-on-one. Oh, there it is. Yeah. And they each privately say, well, you know, those other two guys are very troubled. And as Jesus Christ, I wanted to, you know, do my best for the flock. So I just said, agreed to whatever. And we all said yes. And I left. And I hope this is a good message for you, doctor.
So, it's about acceptance, love.
Oh, man.
And all the good things.
Oh, hold the phone. The story's taking a turn thanks to the magic and poetry of editing and non-linear time. We're not exactly sure where this story is going to break, but we all agreed as a team that this needs to be a two-parter. So stay tuned later in the week for part 2 of the terrifying story of Aum Shinrikyo. In the meantime, we hope this finds you well. We hope that you are safe. We're so grateful for our guest super producer, Gnomes. Shout out to you, Gnomes. And we want to hear your thoughts at this point, especially if you have been involved in something that you did not realize until much later was a cultic organization. Find us online, Conspiracy Stuff Show, wherever, you tag a little @ on stuff when you're sipping the social meds. You can also give us a good old-fashioned email or call us on a telephonic device.
You can definitely call us. And in between, before you call us, if you want to hear more of Gnome's work, why not check out Monster BTK? It's friggin' fantastic. They did a ton of the work. Amazing. Hey, you can call our number. It is 1-833-STDWYTK. It's a phone number. It's a voicemail. You've got 3 minutes. Give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your name and message on the air. If you want to send us an email, we are.
The entities that read each piece of correspondence we receive, be well aware yet unafraid. Sometimes the void writes back. Pro tip. If you are interested in very specific things, you can right now visit aleph.to, aleph.to. Tell us what you think and tell us about the cults in your neck of the global woods. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.